Many of you know that in the National Football League, the first games that they actually have full contact with another team would be called preseason, right? In the NFL, these games typically take place in the hot month of August, called preseason games. There are 4 of them. Many of you know that as well. These games are when coaches test out the newly signed players, right? To see if they are going to make the cut or not. But in these preseason games, the veterans, the players we're most interested in, what happens to them? They don't play that much. And you all know about spring training games, right? Major League Baseball. These games happen in late February throughout the month of March. And they happen down in the sunny, warm states of Arizona and Florida. Arizona and Florida, that's where we all want to be, right? In late February and in March. So buy your plane tickets now, and please buy one for me. I'm sorry, I digress a bit. But spring training games, these games don't count either, right? They don't count in the standings. They're just spring training. They're warm-up games, right? Coaches use these games to evaluate newly signed players. And the veterans, the players we're really excited about and want to watch, they don't play that much. So in preseason games and spring training games, when you win, you really don't win. When you gain the victory, you really don't gain the victory. When you beat your opponent, you really don't beat your opponent. Why is that? None of these games really count. You ever felt as though your life is kind of like that? Sure you have. Sure you have. So have I. There are times when we feel as though our lives are kind of like an NFL preseason game or a Major League Baseball spring training game. We work really hard for something, and when we get it, it just loses its luster. There are times when we work so hard to get that job, to get that promotion, and get that house, and once we achieve the victory, we feel as though it's just kind of dust in the wind. At the end of the day, sometimes life seems so pointless, so meaningless. We all are looking for something that has more substance, that is lasting. We're all looking, whether we realize it or not, we're all looking for real victory. So I've got good news for you. I've got very, very, very good news for you. Today we come to the end of this 7-week sermon series on 1 John. We are calling this sermon series Real Faith because throughout this 5-chapter epistle, John contrasts what is real and what is fake, what is genuine with what is fraudulent and phony. And today John offers real victory, not fake and phony and fraudulent victories. We all know about that. Like when you think you've landed the job of your dreams, and 3 years later, it's just a nightmare. Like when you think you've met Mr. Right, and 3 weeks later, Mr. Right turns out to be who? Mr. Wrong. Or you work so hard to make that team, only to make the team and sit on the bench the rest of the season. That happened to me. I was a junior in high school. I worked so hard to make the junior varsity basketball team at Jefferson High School in Denver, Colorado. And sure enough, final cut, my name was on the list. I made the team. Me, at 4'6". I was playing basketball in high school, but you know what? I made the team, but I sat on the bench. We all know what that tastes like and feels like. It's in that context that John guarantees ultimate, lasting, permanent victory. So let's see what he has to say. Victory, of course, is the word of the day, and thank you, men's choir, for reminding us of that. Victory in Jesus. This is how our second lesson starts. For everyone born of God has the victory. There's the key word of the day, Nike. You thought Nike just sold athletic goods. Long before that Nike, there was a Greek word named, you got it, Nike. Nike is just the Greek word for victory, triumph, winning. And John is going to use this term 4 times in 2 verses. He goes on, victory over the world. This is the victory that has the victory. That sounds kind of wooden. I understand. This is my translation of John's Greek. But this is what he says. This is the victory that has the victory over the world, even our faith. Who is it that has the victory over the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. So 3 out of the 4 times that John uses this term Nike or victory or triumph or winning in these 2 verses, 3 out of 4 times it appears as a verb, right? Has the victory, has the victory, has the victory. Those are verbs. And these are present tense verbs. Big idea. John doesn't use a past tense verb, you had the victory. John doesn't use a future tense verb, you will have the victory. No, it's present tense, has, right now, in hand. This is a permanent possession. This is a habitual victory. This is an ongoing triumph. In other words, John says we are invincible, unconquerable. We have the Nike, the victory. Now, I know when you got up this morning, probably you didn't feel this way. In fact, most of your life, you probably don't feel this way. You feel as though you stumble and fall. You see your wicked thoughts. Oh, those wicked words. Those wicked actions. Because we're all sinners. We all stumble and fall many times a day. But that does not change what John writes. Present tense, has the victory. It's a permanent state, never to be altered. And this was a stunning claim John makes in his world. In John's worldview, people didn't believe that they could ever have victory. Nike, this Greek word, was never used of people. In fact, Nike was used for a goddess. Here she is. Nike, if you know anything about Greek mythology, Nike was a woman, a goddess, and she was the goddess of victory. Only the gods and the goddesses could have victory, triumph. Only gods and goddesses could actually win at anything. And people in this worldview of 1 John, people could never experience real Nike, real victory. That was just for the gods and goddesses. So it's within that worldview that John says 4 times in our first 2 verses, we have the victory. Paul says the same thing. One of the most famous verses in the Bible, right? Romans 8:37. First word I want to focus in on is the word in. You say, well, what's the deal about in? Well, let me tell you. This is a very realistic verse about living in our sinful, fallen, broken, messed up world. See, Paul doesn't say around all these things, that somehow you can get around them. Paul doesn't say you go over all these things. Paul doesn't say you dig under all these things. No, it's in it. It's in right where you're at. In your muck, in your mire, in your mud, in your mayhem, in it all. not around, not above, not under, in. Huge preposition. In all these things, Paul goes on to say, we are more than conquerors. The Greek word here would be hyper. You see hyper there. Everyone knows what hyper is. You've seen a little 3-year-old boy before, right? Hyper. It means supreme, ultimate. Hyper, this is just transliteration of Paul's Greek, Nikomen. There you see a little bit of Nike there, right? Hyper Nike people. Ultimate victors, extreme conquerors, invincible, unconquerable. That's what Paul says. Through him, that is Jesus, who loved us. So even when you're in it, when you're in it all, your machinery breaks down, you have a flat tire, your alarm clock doesn't go off, your kids don't listen to you, you have a bad back, in it all, we are hyper Nike people. That's what John teaches. That's what Paul teaches. John goes on. Victory over what? John says over the world. The world. Now we're going back to these first couple verses because there's so much in them, right? The first point I made, we looked at Nike, and we still have that up there. But now I accent this threefold phrase in 2 verses, over the world. That's the victory. That's the victory. It's not over the government. It's not over the New England Patriots. Sorry to burst your bubble, all right? The victory's over the world. So what's the world? For John, and in all of his writings, world doesn't mean the globe, it doesn't mean civilization, it doesn't mean society, it doesn't mean people. World for John means the world system, the world values, the definitions the world gives to happiness and success and the good life. For John, world is a sick system that is dominated by Satan, living in darkness, and opposed to Jesus. For John, world is a system that is hell-bent on greed and idolatry and jealousy and hatred. For John, he uses the word world throughout his 5 writings in the New Testament. World for John means a system that offers you everything and in the end delivers nothing. It's that world that wants to steamroll you and destroy your faith in Jesus. It's that world that is opposed to everything we're talking about and doing in this church. It's that world that wants to level us and destroy us. It's that world, John says, you have victory over that. Imagine. The hugest enemy of all. There is victory over that world. But how? John goes on. He says, through faith, right? We understand this, right? It's not our battle to fight. Let me repeat that for you, because most of you think like me that you're fighting battles, and if it's going to be, it's up to me. I got to fight this battle. Oh my, it's all up to me. No, it's not. This great verse in our first reading, 1 Samuel 17:47, where David says the battle belongs to the Lord. Whatever you're fighting, it's his battle finally. So we have the victory over the world through faith. And not by what we do, but by what God has done. We go back to these 2 verses. This time, we don't accent victory or the world, but what we have in red would be faith. This is the victory that has the victory over the world, even our faith. Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Faith. Christian faith is not a feeling. Christian faith is not a hunch or a guess. Christian faith isn't something that we cross our fingers over and just hope that it's going to come out. No, Christian faith is based upon fact, substance, historical events. Let me put it this way. Let's say you're hiking with a group of people, and you come across this bridge. Now, if you're like me, you are going to have your 19th nervous breakdown. If you're like my son Jonathan, he would skip across that. He is not scared of anything except his older sister. But me, if I see a bridge like that, and I got to go across a bridge like that, I'm going to go just inch by inch, very gingerly, very fearfully. But the only way to get to their side, of course, is to take this rickety-looking footbridge that is at least 100 feet above the river and the road. Now, you got to have faith in the bridge, right? If you're going to actually do this with your group, you've got to have faith in this bridge. You've got to believe that this bridge is going to get you across. But if you get across, it's finally not your belief that got you across, it's the bridge, right? So I can have a little faith in a strong bridge, or I can have a lot of faith in a weak bridge and fall to my death. Here's the point. Faith is only as good as the object of faith, right? Your faith, my faith, is only as good as the object of faith. So what's our object of faith? What's going to get us across to the other side? John answers that very clearly in verse 5 of 1 John 5. Who is it that has the victory over the world? Only he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. And that's the bridge that gets us across finally from death to eternal life. Jesus is the Son of God, and he's also God the Son. He's the promised Messiah. He's the root and offspring of David. He's the bright morning star. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He's the resurrection and the life. He's the way, the truth, and the life. It's Jesus who is the Son of God. That's the bridge. Faith is only as good as the object of our faith. And you can count on him. He's the Son of God. At his baptism, the Father declares Jesus what? Son of God. At his death, a Roman soldier declares Jesus what? Son of God. Romans 1 verse 4 says that at his resurrection, Jesus is declared what? Son of God. Get it? Our faith is not in faith. Our faith is in the Son of God. Baptized, crucified, and risen. We have the victory, John says, over the world through faith. But how do I experience it? How does God bring this to me? Or do I have to go up to him to get it? John goes on. This victory is delivered right to where you are, right to where I am, just here, just now. We can't go up to get it, so God brings us down and he gives us the means of grace. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at these next couple verses in 1 John 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is the one, he's talking about Jesus, the Son of God, who came by water and blood. Jesus Christ. He did not come by water only, but by water and blood. So what's all that about? Go back to John chapter 19, verse 34, where a Roman soldier took a spear and thrust it through our Savior's side. And what came out, John says, a sudden flow of blood and water. So John is talking about the death of Jesus. But then he goes on. And it is the Spirit who testifies, because the Spirit is the truth. And there are three that testify. And what are these three? Spirit, water, and blood. So hang with me here. What's he doing? Water and blood, the first time and the second time they're used, refer to the death of Jesus. The next time water and blood are used along with Spirit, they point to the means of grace. Now, what do I mean by that? Water, you get that. Water refers to what? Baptism in its second use, right? Third use, excuse me. Blood, of course, in its third use in these verses, refers to the blood of Christ in Holy Communion. And the Spirit, in its third use, refers to the Spirit-inspired Word of God. Get it? So in 1 John 5, verse 8, he is teaching us that the victory achieved by Jesus at his death and resurrection is delivered to us in water, baptism, in blood, in body and blood and Holy Communion, and in the Spirit-inspired Scriptures. You don't have to go up to get it. God brings it down right where you are. There's this great story about the Battle of the Nile. If you like history, you know all about the Battle of the Nile. It was the Brits versus the French. 1798. And in 1798, the Brits really needed a victory, didn't they? I mean, they had just lost the American colonies. This is a huge battle. It really gave British dominance to the entire world at this point. In 1798, Lord Byron was the British general. And the British completely annihilated the French in the Battle of the Nile. Lord Byron went back to Britain, and he told the British king this. It's a famous quote, one of the famous quotes in history. Lord Byron told the king, "Victory is not a large enough word to describe what took place." I mean, we routed them. We annihilated them. Victory is not a large enough word to describe what took place. That's what John's talking about here. Nike, finally, isn't a large enough word. Hyper Nike, Romans 8:37, isn't a large enough word to describe what took place in Jesus Christ. We have the victory, John teaches, over the world through faith delivered in the means of grace. And this victory is so large you can't finally explain it. This victory, who's it for? This victory is for you. Really. Eternally. Amen.